Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I am your host today, and we're going to be talking about the future of cocoa and what the future of cocoa is. And I'm going to make the argument that the future of cocoa is chocolate. And before we get there, I'd like to remind everybody that this episode of Pod Save Chocolate is sponsored by the members of the Chocolate Life. This is the homepage of the Chocolate Life right now. You can go click on the Join button and become a member. There's always a free membership tier. But if you'd like to support the work that we're doing here, you can click on the Join button and you can become a member of the Chocolate Life, again, for free. But if you do have the resources, starting at as little as $5 a month, you can support the work that we're doing here. Also, you can go to, I've got to be very, very careful about which screen I'm on in order to figure this out. It's an interesting day. You can go into the comments, whether you are on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, and you can add a comment to today's episode. And this is the post for today's episode. So you can let me know where in the world you're connecting from, or if you have a comment or a question about anything that I'm talking about today, you can go and ask me that question in the comments. I'll get it out and answer it. I'll give you the shout out if you just tell me where in the world you're connecting from. And I will also then do my best to answer your question. And here is in the upper left-hand corner of the screen right now here is a QR code for today's episode. If you're watching this on your computer, you can scan the QR code with your phone, and you can follow along with everything we're doing here on your phone. And again, this is the post for today's episode. I do one for every episode. And you'll notice it says future to the right and past to the left. There's actually some very interesting sort of linguistic framing here, which is one of the challenges that I have expressed in the past about using global north versus global south, or developed versus developing nations, in that there's an implicit sense that north is better than south and that right is better than left. And we want to move forward towards the future as opposed to staying in the past. And I think that's a good place to start for today. So let's go and take a look at this. So all of the things that you're seeing here are sort of a run of show. It's an outline for the way the episode is going to go. And this is where I want to start off. So over the course of the last, since August is when I started the Changing Landscape of Cocoa Sourcing series. So a post in August, a post in September, and a post in October, and then an episode of Pod Save Chocolate in October. I've been talking about cocoa sourcing, and then I've also been talking about how programs like the International Cocoa Initiative's Child Labor Monitoring Reporting System, ARS 1000, how these ideas are sort of central to our notion now of not just sustainability, but how we should approach sustainable programs and actions. And what I've done is I've put together a list of the most important ones of those episodes, not just of Pod Save Chocolate, but also of posts where I talk about this. So the Changing Landscape of Cocoa Sourcing. So I would suggest, if you have the time, that what you do is you go take a look at some of those episodes and some of the posts and evaluate what it is that I'm saying today in light of the history of what it is that I'm talking about. I will give you sort of a TLDR kind of overview, but there is some deep dive, and I have been working towards these ideas, the ideas that I'm going to present today, right, over the course, publicly here on the Chocolate Life and in Pod Save Chocolate for the last couple of months. But let's get started with that. So, right. So again, here, recent episodes have covered topics on sustainability, the future, and sourcing. And in this episode, I will connect some dots by suggesting concrete ways to remedy challenges the industry faces. So as I pointed out in the episode 161, right, everything has to start with sustainable markets for chocolate, which means it is the responsibility of actors in consuming countries to take the lead. Now, what do I mean by that? The conventional definitions of sustainability, right, focus almost exclusively on producing countries. So we talk about issues related to environmental sustainability. We want to be good stewards of the farms and the supporting ecosystems and the dependent ecosystems. The Brundtland says the resources are managed in a way that they will be usable by future generations, but they don't talk about how that's going to get paid for, which I think is a fundamental issue with all of the programs, right, that are in place. These are challenges which exist in producing countries, but we're going to create legislative and other kinds of frameworks, and we're not going to talk about who pays for them. So we need to think about, in a producing country, the elements of sustainability. All the 16 or 17 of the SDGs can be accounted for by three sustainability categories: environmental sustainability, economic sustainability, and social sustainability. But when most people are talking about, I want sustainable cocoa, what they're talking about is, how do we address the environmental, economic, and social issues which exist in producing countries? Not, oh, what are the conditions in the United States, or what are the conditions in Amsterdam, or what are the conditions in France or Belgium, right, that might be contributing to the challenges we're facing in producing countries. So we're up here in consuming countries, which I think is a neutral term as opposed to global north, right, or first world country. So I like the neutral term. But if all of the focus of our thinking, right, is that these are challenges which exist in producing countries, then all of the solutions, all of the answers that we're going to come up with, focus on the producing country. So if we think about environmental sustainability, is that the farms and their supporting and dependent ecosystems are managed in a way so that they are healthy and thriving for over 100 years. But if we look at economic sustainability, not as living income for farmers, right, or not only in terms of living income for farmers, but the farmers also need the resources to be able to implement the environmental sustainability objectives. So it's not just enough for them to have enough money to eat and have enough money to send their kids to school and have enough money to have an upwardly mobile lifestyle, if that's what we're thinking about. If that's the definition for what living income is, right? There need to be the resources to be able to replant and to hire labor and all the other things that are necessary in order to be able to provide to deliver the resources that the farmers need to manage their farms, if we're going to think about environmental sustainability as an issue, right? And right now, those numbers are relatively high. The economic sustainability numbers are relatively high because there's been a lack of systemic investment in farms and farming for at least the last 5 decades, for at least since the 1970s. There's been no systemic investment by NGOs or by governments, by anybody, in ensuring that farms are healthy. It's rare that individual smallholder farmers have those resources. Sometimes cooperatives have those resources, especially if you have NGOs that they're partnering with them. Or if you're in a stateholder, I mean, if you're a family or a small for-profit group that is managing farms, then you might have the resources to do that. And you probably built your farm, designed the plantings around these notions. And I gave the example of the Hacienda Victoria, which is in Guayas in Ecuador, as one example. It's a privately owned estate. They have invested huge amounts of money in specialized planting systems, as well as working on how do we make a carbon neutral farm so that we're actually bringing more carbon into the soil than we are exhausting into the atmosphere. So it can be done, right? And but it is rarely done in the context of a smallholder farmer or a cooperative of smallholder farmers. But more importantly, or as importantly, farmers live in communities, right? And so social sustainability, how do we make sure that the community has the resources? That communities need to be healthy and thriving, right, for in future generations. And that requires money, right? There needs to be reliable water, reliable transportation, reliable power. Maybe there's a local school. I mean, the challenge with what it is that fair trade is all about, what the Rainforest Alliance is all about, is that it really doesn't discuss the mechanisms by which all of these economic realities are going to be taken care of, right? And the UDR was built without any thought whatsoever to what the costs were going to be in terms of implementation in producing countries or implementation within the European Union. Just no thought whatsoever. And so if we're going to do all of these things, right, related to sustainable cocoa, right, then what we need to do is we need to have sustainable markets. And these markets are necessarily in the consuming countries. So it is the markets in the United States. It is the processors who are not located in the country of origin, who are doing derivatives. It is the people who are manufacturing chocolate. It is the people who are in the retail distribution chain, which is where most of the value added is. I mean, if we just use $5,000 a metric ton as a sort of baseline price, and then we're looking at 4 million metric tons, then all of cocoa is worth $20 billion. And then the chocolate market is somewhere between 180 to $200 billion, depending upon the methodology, who's doing the counting and what they're counting. And so cocoa represents a relatively small percentage of the overall market. And specialty cocoa is at about the same, or specialty chocolate is about the same time as it's about the same size as the entire cocoa market. It's about $20 billion a year. However, the craft chocolate world is only a small percentage of the specialty chocolate world. We don't know, right? But so if what we're going to do is affect change at cocoa farms, we first need to affect change in the way chocolate is marketed and sold, right? And so I'm going to propose that chocolate is the economic key to solving the cocoa crisis. And this is in part because chocolate is what the consumer sees. I mean, relatively few consumers know where cocoa comes from. Relatively few chocolate consumers are directly involved in farming, and fewer consumers know anything about subsistence farming. I mean, if I'm in the Netherlands, I will know about farming in the Netherlands, but that's not subsistence farming in the Ivory Coast. It's not subsistence farming in Colombia. These are very, very different experiences with farming. Even, farming here in the United States, I may call myself a corn farmer, but knowing what it is that I know about farming corn doesn't really tell me doesn't tell me everything I need to know about subsistence farming, right? Relying on cocoa as an income crop, as a cash crop in Colombia or Ecuador or any place else. So because few consumers know anything about subsistence farmer, and they don't care. I mean, they don't have that context. They don't care about that. Right? What they see is rising prices on supermarket shelves. And while many people profess to care about ethical and sustainable sourcing, their purchase behavior says that when those values, that ethical, sustainable cocoa increases the price of chocolate, right, they will seek out lower cost items. Outsourcing, and this is something that I cover at great length in the first part of the changing landscape in cocoa sourcing, and there's a link to that here. I talk about outsourcing the morality, and you can't actually separate the morality of sourcing or the morality of production from the morality of consumption, but that's what a lot of people do. They will say, I do like the idea of ethical cocoa. I do like the idea of slave-free cocoa. I do like these ideas, right, when translated into chocolate, but oh my gosh, I'm looking at the difference in price, and I'm going to go buy the cheapest thing I can find on the shelves in my local grocery store. So what I'm going to go suggest is if chocolate is the economic key to solving the cocoa crisis, what I want to have is I want what I call a big, hairy, audacious goal, a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. And that is to grow the specialty chocolate sector from about 10% today in 2025, for about 10% of the global market, with chocolate less than half of that 10%. There's a typo there I will fix, right? Today to at least 25% by 2035. So we want to more than double, right, the amount of specialty chocolate, which by my definition is a specialty chocolate is made from specialty cocoa. What we want to do is we want to double that, right, to 25% of the market, right, within the next decade, right? So in order to do that, we need to grow the number of consumers who will preferentially purchase specialty chocolate over industrial chocolate, or craft chocolate over industrial chocolate. And again, I'm going to suggest that what we do is we adopt a similar kind of nomenclature in the specialty coffee world, right? A specialty coffee beverage is a beverage which is made from a specialty coffee bean, which has received a rating above a certain point as a part of the Q grading system, right? So there's a quality grading system, and specialty coffee from the beverage is related to specialty coffee in the bean. And we want to build on top of that instinctual customer understanding now, because the coffee world has really talked about this for decades, that a specialty chocolate bar or a specialty chocolate product is made with specialty cocoa beans. Now, right now, I realize that, we don't have a good definition for what a specialty cocoa bean is, right? And I want to make sure that what we don't do is we don't say, let's let the perfect definition get in the way of moving in that direction. So let's say we want a definition for what a specialty cocoa bean is within 5 years, right? And then we're going to continue to work towards that definition of specialty cocoa while we're building the world of specialty chocolate around it. So I acknowledge that just growing the market to 25% on its own is not going to ensure that farmers are compensated in a way that pays for the reforms that address the environment, economic, and social sustainability issues at the farm level in producing countries, right? And as I say, but we can't let perfection, right, having a perfect plan, keep us from at least beginning the work. So what are some of the things that we need to do to achieve this big, hairy, audacious goal? And I've got a list of some of them. The first one of which is we need more and better data, right? If you don't have good data, you can't make good decisions. Or if you don't have enough data, you can't make good decisions. And so right now, for example, no one knows how many craft / bean to bar chocolate makers there are in the world. No one knows. Nobody is keeping track of that, right? And we don't know how much cocoa. Maybe there are 5,000 of these things. If each one of them is buying just 5 metric tons on average, we can get an idea for how much cocoa they're buying and what the approximate economic value of that cocoa is, right? And we don't know how much chocolate they make, and they don't know what that chocolate sells for. So we have a whole important group in the chocolate community, and we have no idea anything about them. We don't know about the economic value. And so we're making policy decisions about this and that and the other, and we're missing lots of data. Now, there is a lot of data out there, but it tends to be siloed. It's in incompatible formats, right? But if you could put it all together using AI tools to make the gathering and transformation easier, then you can get this data relatively quickly, and you can use what it is that you know about these entities as points of entry into finding more data about them. So number one is we want to know everything we can know about chocolate makers and put them into some sort of format that is easily accessible and easily queryable. That is one of the things that is necessary. I want to jump. So farmers also, this is from Drummer Major, who's watching on YouTube. Thank you very much. Farmers also need to see the benefits of growing fine aroma cacao. The farmers we work with in Colombia struggle to convince their neighbors to grow quality genetics over quantity. So Drummer, so as long as I've been working in chocolate and cocoa, which has been, about 25 years now, the first place I ran across this in person was in Ecuador. How do you convince farmers to grow, Arriba Nacional, right, when it's less productive and it is more delicate, when they're not actually achieving a premium for it? Right? So right now the market is not really set up, right, to be able to pay farmers the premium for that. So farmers need to see the benefit. Number one is, if they're not going to get paid more, they're not going to grow it. If they're not going to pay more, they're not going to grow it. And so the way you're going to show to a farmer that they should invest in new seedlings and then wait several years for them to become productive, and maybe if you've got the Trinitario, which is not as productive as CCN51, which may not be a huge crop planted in Colombia, but certainly it is in Ecuador and Peru next door, it's going to be a challenge, right? And then you'll get one NGO come in and say, this is the way to ferment properly, and then some other NGO come in and say, no, they're doing it all wrong. You need to ferment this way. I mean, there are a lot of factors which need to go into convincing. But if you're an NGO, number one, and you're working in Colombia and you're looking to improve the lives and livelihoods of farmers, the first thing you should be doing, in my opinion, is guaranteeing the market for all of the cocoa. If you're an NGO and you're trying to convince farmers to grow higher quality cocoa, however you define higher quality, then you should be willing to purchase every bean that is grown and pay the premium price that you think, well, that you have calculated, not that you think, that compensates the farmer for all of their extra work. But the number one overarching premises of all of this is, if the farmer's not going to get paid for the work, they're not going to do the work. And that's just, good economics, unfortunately. And so, for example, Drummer Major, I know that in Colombia, the Coffee Federation has a 6 or 8 cents per pound tax on exported cocoa or exported coffee. And that tax is then used to fund many of the activities of the Coffee Federation, which includes buying every coffee bean which gets presented to them. But there's nothing like that in cocoa. So that's one thing that the government of Colombia could do to start incentivizing farmers to be able to, number one, invest in planting their farms, invest in perhaps growing lower productive but higher quality, so that they can earn more money. But this is the problem. This is another problem. It's not the problem, but it is a challenge that if I'm going to grow less productive cocoa, but I'm going to get a higher price for it, I need to make sure that that price differential covers the reduction in production. And so there's a lot of work to be done to educate a lot of people, including the markets, right? So right now, the market, writ large, is over 80%, right? Commercial bulk commodity cocoa, right? And it's been shocked. That price has gone up to $12,000 a metric ton. It's about $5,000 a metric ton now on the markets. But getting commodity commodity cocoa buyers to pay more for a specialty chocolate is going to be a real challenge. And in order for that to happen, the consumers need to step up to the plate and say, we are willing to pay that price. And so that's where we as consumers have an opportunity to, if we aggregate, we can perhaps demonstrate to commodity chocolate makers that there is an appetite for specialty specialty cocoa and specialty chocolate. So Feta Cacao has a similar program, but not the same. The big industrial houses like Lucre and Davida tend to control the local market of what producers grow. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, Lucre. I was in Colombia in 2022. I was in the area of Valledupar, went up to Minca, and then went to Necoclí and that area there, and was with representatives of Lucre on that trip. I saw a little bit about what's going on. But yes, in Colombia, you have two very large companies. You have the National Cocoa Company, and then Davida and Lucre. So you have three companies that control the local market. And however, this is one of the great things. The program I was talking about in coffee. Oh, you said Feta Cacao does have a similar program, but not quite the same. So when I was there, I did have this discussion about coffee and about how there wasn't a cacao program that was exactly the same. But this does show how, right, there is how forward-thinking government interventions can get income from cocoa that is exported, and then use that money for programs on the ground. So if every bag of cocoa or every kilo of chocolate that Lucre exports is taxed, right, and that money goes into a fund to be able to help farmers plant different genetics and to improve the health of their farms, those kinds of activities. And that would be independent of the individual large companies. I recognize this is easier said than done. I recognize that it's easier said than done. To make it happen, however, requires people in consuming countries to signal to the chocolate companies and cocoa traders and national federations in producing countries that this is what we want. We are not going to make any effective change on the ground in producing countries until we, as consumers, signal that this is what we want, right? And we're going to signal that by buying preferentially a particular kind of chocolate made with particular cocoa, right? And that's the way we're going to do it, in my opinion. You might disagree with me, and if you do disagree with me, go into the comments, whether it's the live chat on YouTube or the comments in LinkedIn or Facebook, and let me know what you think, right? Again, if we leave this to the companies whose businesses these are, they're going to do everything they can to maximize their returns to their investors and shareholders and to the families that own them, right? They're not going to make a change until consumers indicate that they want a change. And we can do that here in consuming countries by signaling preferentially that we want to buy products made from this specialty cocoa, right? So we do need more and better data, right? If we don't know who these companies are, where they are, how much cocoa they're buying, how much chocolate they're making, we're not making good policy decisions, right? And so we need to start off with more and better data. The second thing, number 2 on my list, these are pretty much in the order that I thought of them, right? Is that there needs to be organizational support for specialty chocolate and cocoa. So as I mentioned, the specialty coffee industry through Specialty Coffee Association, right, has pretty much been able to create a definition for specialty coffee, right? So specialty coffee beans are used to make specialty coffee beverages. You can't make a specialty coffee beverage out of a commodity coffee bean. Very, very simple, right? I think that one way to help reach this big, hairy, audacious goal is to set in place a similar kind of thought process in the world of cocoa. A specialty chocolate is made from a specialty cocoa bean, and a specialty cocoa bean is one which has been rated at a certain level or above. Now, we have that infrastructure in place, right, in a very, very small way, and that is through the Cacao of Excellence program. They have a rating system. They have they have the fundamentals in place. And what is needed is large scale support to be able to take this idea and push it out into large parts of the world. We need to move away from the commodity rating system, which is to cut a cocoa bean in half, right, or 100 cocoa beans in half and count defects. Right? That's the way commodity cocoa is rated. Specialty cocoa should be tested organoleptically. That's, I think, the way to do this. And we have a definition for specialty chocolate. Specialty chocolate is made from specialty cocoa, and specialty cocoa is any cocoa that has received a score of a certain level or above according to the Cacao of Excellence metrics. And so I would support a lot of funding of the Cacao of Excellence program to be able to go beyond, 50 samples every 2 years. But we do have a database of hundreds of specialty cacao growers, right, through the history of the Cacao of Excellence program. We do have a very small database through the Heirloom Cacao Preservation program. There might be an overlap between there. And we can look at cacao which has been awarded in national competitions. So we have the start of a database of saying, here is specialty cacao, right? And we can start promoting that cocoa by its organoleptic potential. And this is one of the things that the MOCA project has done, maximizing opportunities for cocoa, coffee and cocoa in the Americas. All right, and I've had the pleasure of working with with Zoe Papalexandratou, who's a fermentation scientist. And for several years, MOCA has used a visualization that I created for expressing, right, the flavor characteristics of the cocoa. And for some years, the Cacao of Excellence did as well. So I've been working on that aspect of this since 2015. So we need organizational support for specialty chocolate and cocoa. And we need to start thinking about this as chocolate and cocoa rather than cocoa and chocolate, right? So that's a sort of fundamental flip in our thinking, is that we need to be thinking about specialty chocolate and cocoa, not specialty cocoa and chocolate. So in that respect, the CHOCOA name is pretty good. Chocolate and cocoa is pretty good. In order to have better chocolate, you need better cocoa beans. Everybody needs to start thinking about this that way. It's not the Specialty Cocoa Association, right? It's the Specialty Chocolate and Cocoa Association, or something like that, right? We need to start thinking about it that way, and we need to make sure that we have organizational support for a metric that says, this is what specialty chocolate and specialty cocoa is. And then if you were to look at the International Chocolate Awards or the Academy of Chocolate Awards, what you could do is you could have, this is made with specialty cocoa, right? And it becomes a reinforcing system, right? Really, really important. Another thing that I think we need is maker cooperatives in consuming regions or countries. And I mentioned in the previous episode that I spoke with Nick Davis of 1-1 Cacao in Jamaica, and this is 3 or 4 years ago. And he said, he thinks it's pretty telling that we up here, right, in quote unquote the global north, are always telling people in the global south that they need to create cooperatives. Right? And one of the things I'm going to suggest is that up here in the consuming countries, we need to create cooperatives. Wouldn't it be great if 100 small chocolate makers here in the United States were to join into a cooperative, and they could buy cocoa butter? And they could buy cocoa butter at the scale of 100 makers rather than their individual ones. Or they could arrange for transportation of beans from one place to another. So the notion that cooperatives always need to be in producing countries, I think, is fundamentally short-sighted. That there is an enormous amount of value in creating cooperatives in consuming countries. And I would challenge that this is something that needs to be done in the United States. We need to get all of the small chocolate makers in the United States, and we need to get them into a cooperative structure where they can negotiate bulk buy for package, whatever it is that they're looking for. They need to be able to do that. I mean, right now there is a bean to bar organization in Spain, and there's a bean to bar organization in France, and then there's a bean to bar European organization. And to the best of my knowledge, none of them is really thinking about cooperative buying, right? They're just independent organizations, and they're not really focusing on any of these aspects, and they should. And if you only have 15 members in one country and 20 members in another country, that's not big enough, right? You need to do this at a scale large enough to be able to do this. But we need maker cooperatives in consuming regions and countries. They can do group buys, so they can have the kind of economies of scale that a very large company does, right? But more importantly, one of the aspects of membership dues, right, would be coordinated marketing programs. One thing that the specialty chocolate world, the craft chocolate world needs is coordinated marketing programs. Right? There needs to be common language that is used everywhere. Now, we can worry about little nuances like, oh, what does it mean to be bean to bar? I don't want to get involved in saying, oh, we need to have a perfect definition for that everybody in the world will agree to before we can start this. But there needs to be coordinated marketing programs. None of these small makers have marketing budgets which are large enough to effectively message about what it is that they're doing. Even when they get together in a professional association like the Fine Chocolate Industry Association, the FCIA doesn't have a budget which is large enough to do a coordinated marketing program that all of the members can take advantage of, right? If I had a cooperative of 400 makers, right, which got together so they could do group buying, and what they could do is then pay for coordinated marketing on their behalf. I mean, you've got, it's like, how do we do the equivalent of got milk for chocolate? Right. And for people who are outside the United States, the Got Milk program is a special federal, U.S. federal agricultural marketing program, which earmarks dollars to grow a business, an agricultural business, by providing funding for marketing programs. Right. So we need these coordinated marketing programs. When somebody walks into a store, they know what they're going to get. It's like we could take specialty chocolate and we could market specialty chocolate, and all the members of these cooperatives could say, we're specialty chocolate and we're a member of this association, and a rising tide lifts all boats. And if I only have, $20 for marketing, but somebody's got $50 for marketing, together we have $70 for marketing, or $7,000 or $10,000 for marketing. And what do we do with that? Right? So it's really, really important that we put together cooperatives in consuming countries. And one of the things that those cooperatives are going to do is they're going to do a coordinated marketing program, right, around the values, the ethics, the reason why everybody is doing this. I think we also need to think about common transparency reporting guidelines. And we want guidelines that are not onerous, right? That, don't require, huge costs associated with verification and auditing. But what this common framework does would say that if I have company A and company B, they're both reporting the same way. They're reporting the same things in the same way. And I bring this up. I look at the transparency report of Uncommon Cacao. I look at the sourcing reports that Dandelion has done. I look at the FAIR report that Tony's does. They all have, and I'm looking at all of. I have looked at all of these in detail and broken them down. They're reporting different things in different ways. And if they're reporting different things in different ways, it's impossible to be able to compare them meaningfully, because you very, very quickly get lost in the minutia. And so one of the things that I would suggest about these common transparency reporting guidelines, to make them relatively inexpensive to do, is that you'd ask the company that was filing your tax returns. So you have an accountant that's filing your tax returns, and the accountant would fill out as one of the schedules. Obviously, you're not sending it off to the federal government, but they would schedule and they'd fill it out, and it would be the same way, and they'd sign it, right? And so you'd have an independent audit, right, attestation by a certified public accountant that this is what you did over the course of a year. Here's how much cocoa we purchased, right? You don't necessarily have to say who we bought it from, although that information is there, right? But we have these common transparency reporting guidelines, right? And the way to distribute risk and the way to distribute cost is to make them a part of the just general tax reporting system. Again, you're not submitting them to the federal authorities wherever you're located. You just say, oh, you want your accountant as a part of what it is that they're doing. They're just filling out another form, right, and signing the bottom of it, saying we attest that this is true. It also reduces the risk that one bad actor can corrupt the system. The chances of 40 different chocolate companies having the same accounting firm is relatively low. And so you can't have one accounting firm which is going to cook the books for a lot of companies. Everyone's got their own, right? And you put this form and you put it into a public database. You could de-identify who the maker is, but now you can do aggregated statistics on this stuff, which is what we're looking to do. It's really important because we don't have good data, right? It makes a way to do this. Right? The other thing I'm going to suggest as a part of this big, hairy, audacious goal is that any NGO who's working in any aspect of cocoa needs to move their global headquarters to a producing country. And in this respect, I think that the move, it's within the last 5 to 10 years, of ICO to move their headquarters to Abidjan is exactly the right idea, right? If the Rainforest Alliance were to take every single one of their senior executives and move them to Cote d'Ivoire or Ghana or to Abuja in Nigeria, and that's where it was headquartered, I think the world would be better off. Number one, it should reduce transportation costs, right? Right. But how much of the budget of these organizations is spent on maintaining headquarters? I mean, Fair Trade USA was in Oakland many, many years ago. I took a look at what they must have been paying in rent on their headquarters building in Oakland. And I'm going, oh my gosh, how much product has to be sold in order to be able to support, the entire the employees, all the employees and all their benefits and everything in Oakland, right? If they were in Ecuador, close, right, to where the problems that they wanted to solve, it would be better for everybody. So, this is everybody. Voice Network would do this. Be slavery free in Australia. Hey guys, you need to move. You need to go into. You need to move your headquarters into a consuming country, and you need to do your work in close proximity to the farmers you claim you are working and on behalf of, right? Right. I think about FLO for Trade. I believe they're headquartered in Bonn, Germany. So you've got the senior executives are earning enough money to be able to drive in Mercedes when a cocoa farmer is having trouble affording a motorcycle. I hope that is straightforward enough. Another thing that needs to get done is an independent entrepreneurial development fund. And so, Drummer Major, if you're still listening, this might be some of where this money gets put into. It gets put into an independent fund, and entrepreneurs present projects to this independent fund, right? And it could be a global development fund. It could be a country development fund. It could be funded by individuals. It could be funded by NGOs. It could be funded by membership fees. There are lots of ways in which these funds can be developed. They can make it easier for people to get access to climate bonds and other funding. There might be ways to take people with a lot of money who are looking for financial instruments called standby letters of credit. They're looking to invest billions and billions and billions of dollars. And so having an independent entrepreneurial development fund, which can say, oh, here are a bunch of farmers. Let's go find a way to be able to re-engineer their farms so they can produce the same amount of cocoa on less land or more cocoa on less land. And we can do something which is, carbon neutral. We can take care of, we can implement planting programs which reduce the use of water, which reduce the use of chemical agricultural inputs, right? We can do all those things, right? But right now, there is no independent entrepreneurial development fund in cocoa to start doing all these projects to figure out what works. And we need that, right, in order to make it work, right? And so another thing that I think is also important is how do we make smaller farmer federations easier to set up? And this is one of the challenges that I see with ARS 1000 in Africa, right? Is that the bureaucracy, right? Ostensibly the ARS 1000 is about sustainable cocoa, right? But there's this huge bureaucracy about setting up, recognized entities and farmer groups and having cocoa farm development plans and things like that. And the cost of that makes it essentially impossible that an individual smallholder farmer or a group of 5 or 10 farmers to be able to come up with the resources in order to be able to comply with all of the requirements of ARS 1000. Right? So how do we go about organizing farmers to say, listen, here's a group of farmers, and between them, they can produce 2 40-foot containers of dry cocoa a year, right? And maybe the minimum they're shooting for is 1. So that's 25 metric tons dry. So how do we go about making it possible for those farmers to get together and have the resources to be able to allocate to make sure that all of them are maximizing the return of the inputs that they're purchasing and the labor they're putting into their farm? They can now work on centralized fermenting facilities and things like that because they have the resources to do that. But we don't need, if it takes 200 farmers to set up a cooperative under ARS 1000 in order for it to be economically make sense, I think that's counterproductive. And if the running costs, I mean, if I'm producing 25 tons of cocoa a year dry, and I have to pay 5 tons of cocoa, I have to pay the equivalent of 5 tons of cocoa in order to be able to pay for the certification processes, right, and other legal requirements in order to show that I am compliant under ARS 1000, it's just too heavy. And so we need to find less expensive and easier ways to enable farmers to be able to federate. And I understand in Colombia, can't use that word because it has very, very specific meanings under the language. But how do we make it easier for farmers to cooperate and get the resources that they need in order to, for example, drummer major, collectively, right, we can do more, right, and we can do better, right? But the goal, I think, just generally, should be how do we produce more cocoa on less land, or the same amount of cocoa on less land, rather than thinking, I want to go from 400 kilos per hectare to 800 kilos per hectare. Rather than thinking in those terms, it's, if I've got 5 hectares and I can produce the same amount of cocoa on 3, I can take those 2 hectares. And if I'm connected with 4 farmers to the one side of me and 6 farmers to another side of me, and we can connect that land, right? What we can do is now we can convert that land and we can do a small biodiversity corridor, right? And we can do other forms of farming, which will provide more income stability, right? We need to be rethinking the notion of how we go about making farmers, quote unquote, cocoa farmers, more productive, right? NGOs, I think, also have to stop competing for customers. This is something that I saw in Bolivia. This is something that I saw in a bunch of different places where you have 2 or more NGOs. They've got 2-year programs they've got funding for, and what they're doing is they're going into a country and they're trying to figure out, how do we go about finding cooperatives or individuals or businesses that we can spend our money on and bring them into our program. Right? And what you'll do, which makes sense, is like you've got all this money, right? It's only for a 2-year program, but you're competing, right? And your method of doing something may be different from another NGO's method of doing something. So you're not even going in and being consistent. In Peru, I mean, oversight of USAID money was given to TechnoServe for many, many years. It's no longer there. It's under Alianza Cacao Peru, TechnoServe's motto was business solutions to poverty, but it turns out that in cocoa, not all the problems lend themselves to business solutions. They're human relations, they're HR problems, right? And in terms of organization and things like that. And if you're coming in and you're saying this is the only way to ferment, all right, from a centralized fermentary, this is the cocoa you need to grow. This is how you need to irrigate. This is how you need to prune. I mean, if you've got two different NGOs, each with different philosophies, going in and trying to get, this is part of the confusion that Drummer Major was talking about earlier. Individual small, they're whipsawing between different ways to go about doing that, and it may be that the NGOs are teaching a different method than, for example, Feta Cacao in Colombia. Feta Cacao may have its desired idea about the best way, quote unquote, to do things, right? But an NGO or competing NGOs may have different ideas, right? But they've got to stop competing for customers, right? They've got to coordinate the money, coordinate the programs in order to be able to deliver value for their clients so that they will last, right, beyond the initial funding horizon. And again, these NGOs, they're just, I mean, I saw this with one of the biggest groups in Bolivia, El Sebo, where they had a 2-year program. And after the funding was ended at the 2 years program, everything fell apart because there weren't any of the external resources, including consulting, right? And there was really no thought about how, the marketing person in Bolivia who didn't speak English and had never been outside of Bolivia was going to be able to sell their product in France. That was never a part of their thinking. But these NGOs themselves are not businesses, and so they don't think like businesses and saying we're producing a product that needs to be sold, right? And how do we make sure that we take responsibility for all the money invested in improving something at the farm level? They're not taking any responsibility whatsoever for figuring out how to sell the product. We also need an engaged online global community, right? And this is something we don't have. We have these individual, bean to bar chocolate associations in one part of the world. We have a trade association here in the United States that, right, after more than a decade, has only got members in somewhere between 100 and 200. It doesn't have an extensive global reach, right? And so this is part of the coordinated marketing program, is that there needs to be an engaged global online community. You need to empower individuals who are passionate about a particular issue. I am passionate about deforestation in the cocoa sector in this part of the world, or I am passionate about how do I address illegal labor, right, in the cocoa sector in this particular country. Whatever their individual passion is, you need to give them the materials. I think you want to give them the materials that enable them to be the best advocates that they can be for their position, right? For their positions, what they are passionate about, right? And that includes a consumer here in the United States. It includes a college student in the UK. It includes everybody everywhere, no matter where they exist within the value chain from the farm to the consumer's mouth. You need to get them engaged in an online global community. It's not happening on Facebook. It's not happening on Instagram. It's not happening on TikTok. It's not happening in any of those places, right? If we want to effectuate change, if we want to get people to preferentially consume specialty chocolate made from specialty cocoa, we need to create an engaged global online community. The chocolate life is not it. I mean, it is what it is, right? I have ideas for what that would look like and how it could happen, and the kind of agency that we want to give people. There are platforms that enable this kind of community, and so if you're interested and have the resources to be able to invest in those kinds of things, reach out. and let me know. I'd be really, really interested in working on this. Again, not as a part of the Chocolate Life, as a completely separate idea. Although I do want to contribute all of the intellectual property and all of the assets, right, which have been a part of the Chocolate Life, a part of my life for the last 20 years. I want to incorporate them into what this new entity might be. All right. So those are 10 things that I think would be broad categories of moving forward, very, very concrete things that we can do, or at least frameworks for concrete things that we can do in order to be able to achieve the big, hairy, audacious goal, which is to grow the specialty craft chocolate sector from about 10%, or the specialty chocolate sector from about 10% of the global market today to at least 25% by 2035. Right? Now, what are some other things that we can do? We can also look at more program ideas that help farmers capture a portion of the upstream added value. One good example of this is what Askinosie Chocolate does in terms of their profit sharing program. 10% of the value, which is raised by selling chocolate that they tie back to one of the communities that they purchase cocoa from, they write a bonus check at least every year, right? And Sean goes and visits at least once a year to every one of these things, every one of the farms, every one of the communities that he purchases from. And then they look at some of the challenges that the community faces. Do they need a well? Do they need a school? Do they need a school lunch program? Right? How do they go about using entrepreneurial solutions to be able to address these challenges in the communities, right? And that's what's got to happen. We here in the consuming countries need to take responsibility for what's going on in producing countries. And Sean specifically is a really good example of making this happen. And there are many other people who do this as well. But we need to, as a part of global marketing programs and engaged online community, do a much better job of promoting the work that these companies are doing. Right now, none of them individually really has marketing budgets to break out. Anyway, so what we don't need is we don't need regulations that do not consider the economic impact and that do not legislate who pays what. One of the failures of EUDR is, oh my gosh, it costs hundreds of millions of dollars across the industry in order to be able to implement it. And there was no thought whatsoever given, as near as I can take, no thought that the legislators in the EU said, oh my gosh, who's going to pay for any of this stuff? And, oh, do we have the resources here in order to pay for the IT infrastructure in order to handle the flood of data that's coming into there? Every single regulation, right? Every single civil society certification scheme. We don't need any more of them, right? They have to, in my opinion, take responsibility for the economic impact. 100%. Don't push it off the balance sheet, right? Don't make it anybody else's responsibility, right? If you're a civil society certification scheme and you're saying, you have to pay to be certified, we're going to take responsibility to purchase 100% of the product, right, that is certified under our scheme, and we're going to take responsibility for marketing it so that you, the farmer, have zero economic risk if you want to be a part of our certification scheme. We do not need another certification scheme that says you pay us for the privilege of certifying, but you assume all the economic risk. That's just economic imperialism made socially acceptable, because what we've done is we've outsourced our morality to a third party. Don't need any more of those, right? And we do not need wholesale adoption of cocoa-free chocolate. This is a post which showed up today. It was in Confectionery New Magazine about key consumer insights. And it says that roughly 38% of the market, according to the research, I'd have to go into looking at, literally, I saw this just half an hour before I went live, but 38% of the market says, right, an alternative to chocolate, right, which is sort of chocolate adjacent, Alta chocolate. It's not really chocolate, it's fake chocolate. But 38% of the market thinks that's a good idea, right? They would be willing to support it. And the level of support is higher among men and younger people, right? It is old folks like me, I'm in my 60s, who've been working in this for a long time, who have this connection to chocolate makers and cocoa farmers. We're all going, this is a really bad idea, right? But it turns out that Men, I don't know what I don't know why the gender skew, um, um, but and I don't know exactly why the age difference is there. I'm going to go take a look at this research and see if I can figure out exactly what they point to as the possible compounding factors. But the future of cocoa is not faux cocoa, right? Right? That just provides big chocolate makers with an off-ramp to be able to absolve themselves of the responsibility that they face for putting us in the situation that we are now. And that's the end of this episode, right? I wanted to provide some concrete suggestions for how to go from where we are to address the cocoa crisis. And the future of cocoa, I believe, is chocolate. And the future of chocolate is in the hands of people in consuming countries who are going to signal to chocolate makers around the world that what we want is specialty chocolate made from specialty cocoa beans. And here's what we mean by specialty cocoa. And here are the terms under which the money, which is required to implement the environmental, economic, and social sustainability goals in the cocoa producing countries. This is how the money gets to the farmer. And with that, I want to say thanks, everybody, for being here with me today. This episode of Pod Safe Chocolate, like every episode of Pod Safe Chocolate, is sponsored by the members of the Chocolate Life. Let me find my cursor. By the members of the Chocolate Life. You can go to the Chocolate Life right now. Here's the homepage, and you can become a member by clicking on the join button. There's always a free membership tier. Let me go over here. There's always a free membership tier and monthly subscriptions to support the work that I do here, to keep the Chocolate Life on, up and running, to do these episodes of Pod Safe Chocolate and everything else that I'm doing, are as little bit as $5 a month. At the higher rate, when you pay annually, there is coaching and consulting hours which are available for what you're doing. If you'd like to think about sponsoring a part of what it is that I'm doing, like paying for StreamYard, which is the program that I use to connect, write me an email and let me know what it is that you'd like to do, and I'd be happy to have that discussion with you. Before I leave, I do want to mention that this coming weekend, I am going to be in Rushville, Indiana, for the Midwest Craft Chocolate Festival. Now, the festival is Friday and Saturday, but I'm leaving tomorrow because I'm doing a bunch of stuff in the community. So I'm not going to be doing an episode of Pod Safe Chocolate this coming Friday. I'm not doing my monthly AMA Chocolate Life member AMA call on Sunday, the 23rd. And I'm going to be traveling on Tuesday of next week. So there's not going to be an episode of Pod Safe Chocolate. I'm traveling next Tuesday for Thanksgiving. I'm hoping to be in a place on Friday, the 28th, which is the day after Thanksgiving, in order to sit down and do some stuff. But we got about 10 days or so in which there's not going to be much in the way of online stuff in terms of episodes of Pod Safe Chocolate. But I wish everybody a good Thanksgiving holiday, however they might be celebrating that around the world, or if you're outside the United States or you're not celebrating Thanksgiving, I wish you a great next couple of weeks. And just a quick reminder before I end, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Until the next time, everyone, ciao.